classroom buzzed with the usual chaos of high school, a mix of laughter, whispered gossip, and the occasional groan about an upcoming test. It was third period, and the students were restless, their energy heightened by the absence of Mr. Peterson, their regular history teacher. Word had spread quickly that a substitute would be taking over for the week, and speculation ran rampant. Would it be another boring retiree reading from the textbook? Or worse, one of those overly enthusiastic young teachers trying too hard to be cool? No one expected what walked through the door. He entered quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A tall man in his late 60s, with silver hair neatly combed back and the glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He carried a leather satchel instead of the standard tote bag most subs brought, and his suit jacket looked like it belonged in a different era. One where people still cared about dressing for work. The room fell silent as he wrote his name on the board in clean, deliberate cursive, Mr. Henry Whitaker. When he turned around, there was something in his gaze, calm but piercing, that immediately commanded respect. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and warm. "I'll be your substitute this week. Let's make the most of it." His words hung in the air, simple yet somehow profound. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone muttered, "Bet he's gonna bore us to death," earning a few snickers. Mr. Whitaker didn't react. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if he'd heard far worse in his time. "We'll see," he replied evenly, before launching into the lesson plan left behind by Mr. Peterson. It wasn't long before I realized Mr. Whitaker wasn't like any other sub we'd ever had. He didn't just read from the textbook or assign busy work. Instead, he wove stories into the material, bringing history to life in ways that made even the most disinterested students sit up straighter. By the end of the first class, he'd managed to turn a dry lecture on post-war reconstruction into a vivid narrative about resilience and rebuilding, not just nations, but lives. As the bell rang and everyone filed out, I caught myself lingering, watching him gather his notes. There was something magnetic about him, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Over the next few days, Mr. Whitaker became a fixture in our chaotic world. Each lesson felt less like school and more like a conversation, an exchange of ideas rather than a one-sided delivery of facts. But it wasn't until Thursday that things truly shifted. That day, during a discussion on civil rights movements, he paused mid-sentence and looked directly at me. "What do you think, Emma?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. I froze, caught off guard. Normally, I blended into the background, content to let others take center stage, but there was no escaping his question now. I guess it's important to stand up for what's right," I stammered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. He nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, standing up is crucial, but so is listening. Understanding why others fight can change everything." His eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer before moving on, but his words stuck with me long after the bell rang. After class, I found myself hanging back again, pretending to organize my books, while secretly hoping he'd say something else. To my surprise, he did. "You have a sharp mind, Emma," he said, leaning casually against the desk. "Don't waste it, hiding in plain sight." His comment startled me, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. Since my parents divorced 2 years ago, I'd retreated inward, letting a life happen around me without really participating. I shrugged, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "You're welcome," he replied, his tone light but sincere. "And remember, sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who see the most." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Who was this man? And why did he seem to notice things about me that even I had overlooked? Curiosity got the better of me, and the next morning I arrived early, hoping to catch him alone. He was already there, seated at the desk with a cup of coffee in hand, flipping through a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "You're here early," he observed without looking up. "So are you," I countered, sliding into a nearby seat. "Do you always read before class?" When I can, he admitted, closing the book and setting it aside. Stories remind us of who we are and who we could be. I hesitated, then blurted out, "Why do you care so much about teaching? You're not even supposed to be here." He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "Fair question. Truth is, I used to teach full-time, decades ago. Loved every minute of it, but life, well, it has a way of pulling you in different directions." His expression softened, tinged with nostalgia. "When I saw the ad for a short-term sub-position, I figured it might be nice to step back into the classroom, even if only for a little while." Something about his answer resonated deeply with me. Here was a man who clearly loved what he did, yet had stepped away for reasons unknown. I wanted to ask more, to pry open the layers of his story, but the warning bell cut me off. Students began trickling in, and the moment passed. By Friday, the final day of his stint, the mood in the classroom was palpably different. Even the troublemakers seemed reluctant to disrupt the flow of his lessons. After wrapping up the last topic, Mr. Whitaker stood silently for a moment, surveying the room. "Before you go," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I want to leave you with something to think about. Life rarely goes according to plan. People leave, opportunities slip away, dreams evolve, or disappear altogether. But none of that means you stop growing. Every experience shapes you, even the painful ones. So when things don't turn out the way you hoped, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I become better because of it?" The room was utterly still, his words sinking in like rain, nourishing parched earth. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. "Thank you for letting me share this week with you. Take care of yourselves and each other." As the bell rang and everyone scrambled to leave, I lingered once more. This time, however, I wasn't the only one. Several students approached him, thanking him for his wisdom and encouragement. Watching them interact, I realized how rare it was to encounter someone who genuinely cared, not just about teaching, but about the people they taught. When the room finally emptied, I approached him one last time. "Will you come back?" I asked, hating how vulnerable the question sounded. He shook his head gently. "Not likely. My journey here was brief, but meaningful, for me, and hopefully for you too." He extended his hand, and I shook it, surprised by the firmness of his grip. "Remember what I said, Emma? Growth doesn't stop no matter where life takes you." Weeks later, I found myself reflecting on those 5 days more often than I expected. Mr. Whitaker's lessons weren't confined to history. They were about living fully, embracing challenges, and finding purpose in unexpected places. Though he never returned to our school, his impact remained, etched into the fabric of my daily thoughts. And whenever doubt crept in, I reminded myself of his parting advice: growth doesn't stop. Sometimes, the people who enter our lives for the shortest periods leave the deepest marks.